Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to Beyond the Seven, live from Jerusalem with Rabbi Aaron David Poston, who's been teaching us the wonderful book, The 48 Ways to Wisdom. And today we've got part 38. We're really making good progress in this class. It's been a long journey, but I'll tell you, it's been well worth it. There's essential elements of what wisdom is that we can acquire and integrate into our lives to begin to walk proper in this world. And I'm so thankful that Rabbi Poston takes the time to research this and prepare for us. So let's just jump in and see how he's doing today. Rabbi Poston, you're live on the air. I'm going to turn it over to you. And today, part 38, exciting.
Thank you, Dan. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you have joined us. If you joined us right now or later on, but anyway, Shavua Tov to everybody. Chodesh Tov. We're looking forward to a month of miracles, B'ezrat Hashem. And, Kislev is the month, and towards the end, we have Hanukkah.
Yes.
So we have good things to look forward to. Let me just put it like that. So for those who have been following this, we're now in 38 out of the 48 ways. So we're really towards the tail end, let's say. And I encourage everybody, take a look back. Go back to the beginning of the series of Beyond the Seven, but for sure be in the beginning of the 48 ways to explain what this whole series is about, because it's very important to understand how these are a progression. Number one, it's a progression. It's about working on your mitos, working on your character. And tonight's topic, number 38, is not taking decisions lightly, which means you have to take them seriously. But one should not, and this is basically what the point is, take such, joy and happiness in making decisions. Now, what kind of decisions are we talking about? And at what point are we talking about not having that joy? I think that if you really do a thorough investigation on whatever it is you're deciding on, and you should feel good about that decision. There's no question about it. But there's in the very beginning of Pirkei Avot, right? I have a copy here just to get a little idea. If you're not familiar with Pirkei Avot, I believe it's the first Mishnah. Actually, probably the second Mishnah. No, the first Mishnah. Talking about, I'll just read it to you. It's the very end of the first Mishnah. Moses received the Torah from God, from Sinai, and conveyed it to Joshua. So Moses received it from God, conveyed it to Joshua. Joshua then conveyed it to the elders. The elders then conveyed it to the prophets. The prophets conveyed it. What is it? These are ethical teachings. This is the Torah itself, to the men of the Great Assembly. And they said three things. And that's how these three things, it ends the first Mishnah. Number one is be deliberate in judgment. So in Hebrew, it says, Havu Matuni Badin. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Because if you're not taking it lightly, well, what is Matuni? Matuni means to weigh things out, to be considerate, to really, I actually wrote a few definitions here. To be cautious, to be slow, to be restrained. So when you're full of enthusiasm, wow, someone came to me, whether I'm a rabbi, I'm a teacher, or an elder of so whoever, a mentor. If someone's coming to me for advice, I'm just going to go ahead, and these could be life or death decisions. These could be, change the person's life. You assume it could be. So just to throw out your first answer that comes to mind is something that you should refrain from doing. It's they confided in you. They coming to you for advice, or maybe for a psak in terms of halacha. So the truth is, this Mishnah, even though it says to be deliberate in judgment, develop many disciples, and make a protective fence for the Torah, it certainly seems from that Mishnah that we're talking about judges. And that's true. That Mishnah is talking to judges, but we'll see, according to some of the other opinions, it's really talking to everybody. And when you think about it, we are constantly making decisions through the day. From the moment we awaken, our eyes open. Should I get out of bed? Should I be late for the minyan? Should I call in sick to work? I have to take my kid to school. Maybe I'll send him on the bus. I mean, there's all kinds of decisions that are made from the very beginning all the way through the
We have
day.
to prioritize too. Yeah.
So don't take the concept of decision making lightly, because there are consequences to your decision. So I'm jumping a little bit because I really felt that this Mishnah is going to describe a lot if we consider the word mitunim. Some translate mitunim as being moderate. I don't know where they got that from. I understand it. We do want to try to go to the middle ground, right? The golden means is right the most let's say balanced decision. That's for sure. But it's clear from most of the commentators that we're talking about savlanut, patience. I'll just give you a quick example. As I mentioned, we're all judging all day long. So really, we're all judges. Even though we're not sitting with, I don't know what they do in Canada. They wear a special wig. They have a, they do that in Canada. They have wigs. I know in Britain, the United Kingdom, we all, yeah, okay. But so we're not wearing gowns, we're not wearing wigs, and we don't have a gavel. But we're constantly judging. We're judging other people. We're judging ourselves. We're judging situations. So, as I mentioned, according to some opinions, this is really talking to everybody. It's talking to everybody. So, number one is just know that life itself is full of decisions. I mean, you can't escape that. You have to know that and be aware of that. God even says when we talk about free will, God says, "I place before you life and death, good and evil. Choose life." So it's almost like for a Jew, especially because he has or she has so many more decisions. Should I eat this or not eat this? As opposed to a non-Jew who doesn't really have those consequences facing them in every detail of their lives. Should I go on a vacation? Is there going to be a Sefer Torah? Is there going to be a minyan? I'm like, so many things are facing a Jew's decision when he wants to go on a vacation that may not, the regular righteous Gentile doesn't have to face. Let's just say. So these are serious things. These are serious things that one should consider, not just take it lightly. Now, we're going to talk about what is your approach to decision making, right? There's a lot of procrastination. Decisions could be difficult and hard, and sometimes you just want to shelf it.
Yeah, back burner.
Say, I'll deal with it later. Guess what? That by I'm going to say making a decision to not decide is already a decision, and that can have grave consequences. So it's not such an easy subject. It really, we only talk for an hour here. And I know in the past you've mentioned we can go on for hours. So what we try to do here is just to give over the overview. People should do their own study, their own contemplation, their own cheshbon, accounting for what it means to make decisions, and learn how to make better decisions, because this could make or break success. Just know there are going to be consequences to how you deal with decision making. We're going to talk about what we call hindsight. Sometimes we don't make the decisions, and then later on we see that if we would have made that, we would have been right. And really, seriously, you have to go back in time. We don't go back in time, but you should learn your lesson that maybe you should have gone with your gut. You should have done a little bit more investigation if you realized 2020 that you got it wrong. So there's a lot of lessons to learn. Also, another idea in not being eager to make decisions is, as I mentioned before, in rabbi school, one of the things we're taught is we have to learn how to say, "I don't know." It's, you're put in a position, maybe it's an authority position, people are looking up to you, and, our gut wants to tell us, "Oh, I don't want to look stupid and say I don't know." But guess what? If you say something off the cuff, so to speak, or I don't know another expression for that, but if you're not matun bedin, you're not being cautious, haphazardly. I mean, I think you're putting your foot in your mouth. You're making yourself you're making yourself look absolutely stupid. And again, the consequences of giving the wrong psak, the wrong hora'ah, the wrong instructions, also have consequences.
Oh, yeah.
So what's the problem with saying, I don't know, I'll look it up? And again, you're prioritizing how soon you get to look it up or ask advice from a scholar who knows more than you. So that's going to be another very important thing. And it's okay to say you don't know, because that's when you will then proceed to research and ask professionals or ask people who are experienced in that particular matter, so that you can come out with a more definitive answer. And you can still say, and maybe should say, this is what I think, this is what I feel at the moment, as opposed to, oh, this is absolutely the truth. Okay, because that's also going to get
Yeah.
you in a lot of hot water, so to speak. Um, it really comes down, again, I mentioned free will because God says, I place before you these choices, right? So if you want to be successful, you should really learn what free will is and how to use
Exactly.
it. Okay. Just to reiterate the topic again, in Hebrew, it's Eno Sameach B'Hora'ah. Do not take joy in the Hora'ah is interesting because Hora'ah means the teaching or instruction, like the word Torah, Hora'ah, Psak Din, halachic. If you think about halachic determinations, don't be so happy. You must approach it with proper caution and responsibility. Have some reluctance. I mean, when someone comes to me and asks me a question, and believe me, I could have heard this question many times, and I gave maybe even the same answer many times. I feel a trepidation. Well, maybe I don't know about this person's circumstances. I hold that if someone goes to a rabbi and asks them a question, and the rabbi does not ask any questions back before giving an answer, maybe they should take his certificate away. I don't understand how, it's like there's no cookie cutter answer, you know. Um, we were discussing beforehand about medical issues. I'll put it like that. And just to say blanket, everybody should do this medical procedure. Well, guess what? There are consequences by saying that. One should say, for sure, go and speak to your doctor. There may be personal issues that preclude you, that you should not go with this medical procedure, even though everyone's talking about it like it's like you get candy on the street corner. It's just, okay, I don't want to go into anything controversial, but I just want to mention that we're talking about major consequences, even though if everybody seems to be doing it. So someone comes to you and says, ask you a very simple question that you've answered so many times. Guess what? Ask them questions about their personal situation, because what you thought was a blanket answer may not apply. So the idea
Yeah,
is
well
not to
said.
be impulsive, right? As a teacher, rabbi, mentor, or anybody that's coming to you, or even in your daily decisions. And don't be so blissful about it.
You
Again,
remember
you
back in
could.
high school, Rabbi, we'd get math books that in the back you'd have an answer to the question as if it was, yeah. And how often people, if you're using it to validate something you've already worked through, it's different than just saying, here is the answer. Work through the scenario with the person, correct?
Bezrat Hashem, that should be what happens. Um, so just think about this: if you're happy or quick, as opposed to matunim, slow and considerate, a good chance you'll make a lot of wrong decisions. I want to give a few examples.
Deliberate.
Yeah. Um, you can actually decide to be happy. We know that. A lot of people don't know that, but this is a choice you have, right? As we know, it's a commandment. In the 613 commandments, the Jew must serve God with joy. A Jew must be happy on the holidays. Idu es Hashem b'simcha, King David said, serve God with joy, that one could develop a attitude of joy, of happiness. So if you decide you want to be unhappy, there's going to be consequences. So if you were running a business and a client or customer came in with a complaint, so how are you going to approach that complaint? Now, there's a couple different scenarios, but I'll just give you two. One could be, look, you're the customer and you're wrong, or you're the customer and you're right. So if you take the side, look, I don't want to hear anything. I'm sorry. The thing I sold you is perfectly fine. Go jump in a lake. So first of all, he could sue you. She could sue you. They could never buy from you again. There could be, I'm not going to say lashon hara. Maybe it's the right thing for them to do. Whatever it is, there's going to be word of mouth on the street that you're not fair, or people, they could tell their friends not to buy from you or to go somewhere else. Who knows? But there are going to be consequences to you decided in the morning when you woke up that you're going to be unhappy, okay? And you're going to treat them miserably, and there's going to be consequences to that. On the other hand, it could be that you accept their complaints, give them whatever you want to call, what we call legitimacy, if that's the word. You're giving them kavod, you're giving them some kind of honor that they at least made the attempt to buy from you, and you apologize, or whatever it is. You say, I can replace it, who knows what, or have it fixed, no time. And before you know it, they walk out with more items than they came in the store with, meaning they decided, this is a good guy, I trust him, and I'm going to buy more from him, because you decided in the morning you're going to be happy no matter what. You see the difference, the success that you can come out with. Okay, it's not going to be in every situation like that. You can deal with very difficult people, and it doesn't matter how happy you try to, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to go home and then take it out on your wife and your kids and your neighbors.
Heaven forbid.
Right? Yeah, God forbid. So basically, also, like, there are people who are very just difficult, and they decide they want to be unhappy, and they want to spread their unhappiness, right? So unhappy people usually, I mean, it's, there's some people who are 100% right, and the whole world's not listening to them, as we saw recently on, I think it was a parent-teachers meeting in somewhere in Virginia, where a certain parent was very upset. The school counselor, they weren't listening, and I think the person had every right to make his voice heard based on what happened. But let's just say in general, that unhappy people get in arguments with everybody. You know what I mean? They just, I don't know, it's a little bit of a demented mind, but look, there are going to be times where you have every right to step forward and, let's say, push the envelope and make sure you're being heard. But there's a lot of times where there's very unhappy people, and their relationships are, I don't know what you want to call them. They go to hell, so to speak. So we mentioned before that insanity is contagious, misery is contagious. So you decide you want to be happy. That can also be contagious in a good way. You can share that with others and be much more successful. So now, with that introduction, I want to go through some of the ideas that the Rosh Yeshiva brought in his book. The first thing he mentions is that many people think they only make major decisions once in a while, but that's not true. We constantly make strings of decisions through our daily life, through every conscious moment, from the time we wake up till the time we go to sleep. It never stops, right? Now we think, okay, should I have this, vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream? That's not a major decision. I get it. That's not really, doesn't really have a lot to do with what we call free
preference
will.
And decision are different.
Right? But more important things, like, how do I greet my spouse? How do I deal with my boss, right? What do I plan on accomplishing today? These are important things. These are important decisions that we do have. Now, even though this statement seems to be halachic decisions, meaning as a rabbi, should understand, as we mentioned in Pirkei Avot over here, right? Be masunim bedin. I'll give you another example when it comes to the judge. We learn that if you're sitting in a group of judges and you all feel pretty much this person's going to be innocent, and you're about to, deliberate, and you pretty much know that this is the conclusion, then one should go forth and make sure that today the person knows he's innocent and goes free. His name is cleared. But on the other hand, if there is enough, you feel that amongst the sages, amongst the judges, that this person is guilty, So the best thing to do is to wait to make that decision till the following day, meaning a public proclamation that the person's guilty, because you may receive additional evidence to show that he's innocent. So this is like in terms of halachic decisions, don't rush. Don't rush. It's very important.
Yeah,
So
you've been very helpful with me on that. I remember when you first shared that back in Pirkei Avos, it's, where it says be deliberate in judgment. And this is the whole point: deliberate, take the time to review the whole of the matter. When I first read that a number of years back, that be deliberate, I took that as meant to be, decisive, and it was incorrect in my approach. It was totally actually opposite from weighing the matter and deliberating on it. And I'm thankful that you had brought that to light, even though I think it was back a number about over a year ago, maybe during the 6 constant mitzvahs. But to me, it actually, oh man, I had that wrong for a number of years, and I was being quick to be decisive, and it was, an incorrect behavior. And I've tried to learn to adjust that, but yeah.
Great, good. So basically, you should know that you should not take the decision making lightly. Know that this will impact the actual quality of your life. Approach it with caution and due diligence. Understand and recognize there's consequences involved to try to get a well thought out and informed, well researched research before you make a decision. Again, just we spoke about people who take the other extreme and they avoid decisions altogether. Just know that that is a decision, and that is probably the wrong decision in most cases. Eventually, you have to make a decision. So
it's hesitation, and it creates confusion, doesn't it?
It can actually have dire consequences. The Rosh Yeshiva mentions we often feel a temptation to just, I guess, hide your head under a rock, to
avoid the confrontation,
making decisions, especially when the issue at hand involves consequences that make us feel uncomfortable, even threatened. I mean, he gives an example. You're a parent, your kid is in school, and there's some trouble at school. I mean, if you don't deal with it, you're gonna see much worse consequences down the road. All right, get up, get on the phone, and speak to the principal, speak to the teacher. Don't just it's a phase, or a fad, whatever these. I guess a phase, right? It's just gonna pass. Sometimes in Baruch Hashem they do, but you have to be a little bit more knowledgeable, right? Just the idea, just know that especially with your children, but any situation where if you put your head under the sand and you don't want to deal with the problem, it could and most likely does make matters worse. Now, of course, there's going to be times where the decision is not to say something, and that could be the right decision. Okay, so you have to know. There's a thing called cognitive dissonance, right? God forbid somebody, finds a lump in their body or something like that. Of course, you would think the right thing to do is to go see a doctor, or at least a professional, right? Somebody that you could really trust.
An expert, yeah.
An expert. But unfortunately, we all know stories, oh, can't happen to me, yeah. It's not this, it's not that, it's nothing serious. Okay, it could be nothing serious, but why wait? Because, so this cognitive dissonance is basically the facts are staring you in the face and you won't see it. And therefore, this is part of the human condition where we're ignoring the truth. And so we need to fight this. It's called temporary insanity. That's what cognitive dissonance really is. And you have to make a decision to go and get off your tuchis and go see a doctor. He mentions about phony decision making, which is basically what they call Monday morning quarterback, assuming that, I know Monday Night Football also, but the idea was that on Sunday was all the football games, and people later on can say, that I would have ran the play that way, or the referee made a mistake. I would have called it like this, or whatever, after looking at the slow motion replays and all that. So we like to think we know better than other people, right? I know better than the president of the United States or the prime minister of Israel or the CEO of a large company. If it were up to me, I would have wiped out terrorism in Israel long ago. Like, we know better than the guy who's in charge of intelligence in Shabbat. So he mentions this idea of being the Monday morning quarterback. It gives us a false sense of power. Since we feel we're making the tough decisions, we didn't make any decisions. We're not even in a position to make decisions, right? And of course, we don't have to bear any responsibility or the consequences. This fosters the delusion that we know everything when really we should be training ourselves to toughen up and make real decisions. So in other words, there are people that they live in a fantasy about decisions. They don't make really any major decisions on their own. They're just watching television or watching reruns or whatever it is, and they think that they got the whole. It's just a way to avoid making decisions. Okay, so now he talks about taking decisions seriously. The example he gives: someone comes to you and tells you that they have this lump or they have to go for surgery, heart surgery, and they want to know what you think. I mean, you're a doctor. you're gonna say, "Excuse me, you need to go right now."
Though. It does happen.
Listen, you need all the evidence in front of you. I mean, he's asking as a friend, he says, "I got two opinions. They're equal." Right? And so maybe you can suggest get a third opinion. But why are you? Remember, the whole idea was what's the word again?
Don't overreach.
Don't take joy in making these decisions, right? You're gonna take joy. You're gonna quickly decide about someone's fate like this. And again, that was the idea of saying, "I don't know." Say you don't know. Don't be pressured into making a decision. It's true. Be open-minded. Research it thoroughly, but don't feel pressured into making a decision, right? Taking the proper precautions and thinking things through will help you minimize costly mistakes in life. Listen, it's someone else's life. Doesn't matter. It's life or death in that case. Could be not life or death decision, but it doesn't matter. Don't run into ask questions. Ask the person so many questions. Let them come to the conclusion, right? That's for all those who are married out there, at least in my life. I come to my wife and I discuss something. She'll ask me a million questions. And before you know it, I figured out what I need to do, right? I'm asking her advice, but spouses should be able to eventually, hopefully, help the person. Maybe it's not just spouses. Maybe it's best friends. Maybe it's a boss, what do you call it, an employee relationship. I don't know. But let's say good friends, people you can rely on. So instead of making the decision, help them see the correct, or let's say the less risky path, or the most successful decision. They'll come to it on their own, and it's really helpful to ask questions. Did you think the issues through carefully, or did you just follow your gut and hope for the best? Right. So most importantly, don't brush off a decision or put it out of your mind because it's too uncomfortable to deal with. I'm going to quote a few other Pirkei Avot. It mentions let me just get my papers here. It says also in Pirkei Avot, it's in chapter 4, Mishnah 5. It's a long Mishnah, but there's one line. It says, "Do not act as a orach din, a counselor at law, when serving as a judge." In other words, you are the judge. You don't want to give the other person, let's say a litigant, ammunition for his own defense. So you have to be very careful, right? You can ask questions to him, of course, but you're the judge. So you can ask him pinpointed questions, but don't act as a judge. Don't act as a lawyer while you're acting as a true judge. In Pirkei Avot, chapter 4, Mishnah 7, it's actually in the name of Rabbi Yishmael. He would say, one who refrains from serving as a judge. Now, we're really talking about a judge, but again, because we all judge all day through our lives, so think about it like this. It's also applying to every person. You're avoiding hatred, thievery, and false oaths. One who frivolously, meaning without being well thought out, he hands down rulings is considered a fool, wicked, and arrogant. And you can understand. It's a very interesting idea that brought in Gemara Yavamos. How should a judge feel? How should you feel? Like it's telling you how. So Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said that Rabbi Yonatan said a judge should always view himself as if a sword were placed between his thighs, so that if he leans right or too much to the left, he'll be injured. As if Gehenna is basically another word for what we'll call hell. Again, that's very different than what the Christians believe. Was open beneath him, as it says. This is in where does it say this? I think in Shir Shirim, Song of Songs, chapter 3, verses 7 through 8. Behold, it is the bed of Solomon. 60 men are around it, of the mighty men of Israel. They all handle the sword and are expert in war. Every man has his sword upon his thigh because of dread in the night. So the idea here was that the dread of Gehenna should be on the person's mind when
to be prepared.
it comes to it's also in Pirkei Avot, chapter 4, Mishnah 8. Do not judge on your own, for there is none qualified to judge alone except for Hashem. He's the one judge. Also, don't say, you must accept my view. For this is the majority's right to decide, not yours. But going back to this mission in the beginning, that if you judge wrong, if you're part of a group, you all share in the responsibility, which means, I hate to say it, but it means you have less responsibility. In other words, if you're the sole judge, which, believe it or not, the more qualified judges are allowed to judge on their own. But the less qualified judges should and only judge in a group. Therefore, if there's 3, 23, 9, whatever amount of judges are sitting on this court, you'll share 1/8, 1/10, whatever it is, a percentage of the decision that was made. So that is just keep that in mind. I mean, you should have this trepidation. And again, we're not just talking about judges, even though the examples that were given are obviously people sitting in a court. Again, we judge all the time. There's a few other examples. In Gemara Sanhedrin, Rav Huna said that whenever a case would come before him for judgment, he would gather and bring 10 rabbis from Rav's Beit Midrash, study hall. And he would say, I would do this so that only a small part of a responsibility comparable to a splinter from a beam would reach each of us. In other words, we'd all split the responsibility. It wouldn't be the full weight of the beam, but we'd all carry, I guess, a small sliver of wood from the beam, a splinter. The greater the number of judges, the less responsibility each one assumes for the verdict, especially if it's wrong, right? Similarly, with Rav Ashi, when a person would come before him with meat suspected to be from an animal with a wound, which would make it non-kosher for a Jew, that will cause it to die within 12 months, called a treifa, he would gather and bring all the butchers from this particular place, Matamachsia, and consult with them before ruling on the status of the meat. Look, first of all, it's someone's money and maybe someone's livelihood, but he would confer with, he would counsel with the experts in the field. And this is comparable to a splinter from a beam, which would reach all of us. He wouldn't be taking full responsibility. I know we started off, what do you mean, don't take responsibility for decision-making? Yes, you have to take responsibility for decision-making, but decide how much. Someone comes to me, and they're asking me a question. Like I said before, I've answered 1,000,000 times. You know what I can do? Let me look it up. I already know the answer. But it gives me time to even think what I can ask him in the meantime while I'm looking it up. And I'll show him what it says. And I say, does this apply to you? I mean, get him to talk. Get the person coming to you. Ask them questions. So first of all, you're reaching for the book, takes time. And even though, what are you trying to show off that you know it all? Oh, yeah, let me be the first quick, response. Unfortunately, that's a big part of immaturity in this world and people's lack of self-esteem and self-worth. They're quick to want to answer. In fact, even in your presence of your rabbi, I'm talking about Jews, non-Jews, right? Especially Jews, though, in the presence of your rabbi. So someone comes and asks him a question. What chutzpah? it's it's actually a very big penalty, consequence in heaven for someone who shouts over and is quick to respond. What's the point? What are you trying to prove? When you want to show the world how smart you are, you want to show your rabbi how smart you are. This is actually it's a big problem. It's a big problem. I mean, talking the Torah says that this is a big problem, and the answer it's actually death from heaven. I mean, this is a very serious thing for someone to do. So keep that in mind. Even to the point that if your Rebbe is in town and someone comes to you, you have to make sure you have permission from him to answer these questions. Otherwise, you always try to, I'm not saying in a negative way, push it off to a higher authority. Of course, if you have smicha from a rabbi, meaning the authority to give answer questions, obviously it's the more simple questions he doesn't mind at all. So the bigger questions you should definitely confer to him. Now, the Gemara in Sanhedrin 7b continues and mentions about a judge. If you appoint a judge over your community who's not fit, it's as though you planted an Asherah tree. Asherah tree is a idol worshipping tree, something that tree that people worship. It says in Deuteronomy 16:18 that you shall make judges and officers for yourselves. Right? We have this obligation. So too, the Noahides, to make sure you have a system of justice, meaning enough, lower courts, middle courts, and higher courts. And that's in 16:18. And a few verses later, not that many, verse 21.
Would you like me to read that?
Yeah, sure. The number, which one? 18 and then 21.
Says, you shall set up judges and law enforcement officials for yourself in all your cities that the Lord your God has given you for your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment.
So you see here, you have the obligation to make sure you have a system of court, justice. And go ahead, now 21.
Read 21 says, you shall not plant for yourself an Asherah or any tree near the altar of the Lord your God, which you shall make for yourself.
So for those who are not familiar with Jewish learning, I mean, we're talking about, we have a tradition from Mount Sinai. There is a smichut, there's a proximity from this verse to that verse, that there's a learning and a connection. So appointing judges and officers that are not fit is like planting an idol worshipping tree. So it's really connected to the next point, because it mentions you should not plant the Asherah besides the altar. What does it mean besides the altar? That's exactly where the Sanhedrin sat, next to the altar on the Temple Mount. Which I want to bring up another idea shortly. I just have to find it. I have here a very interesting commentary on that mission in Pirkei Avot that I'd like to comment on. This particular, do I have the book here? Anyways, it's a very fascinating book. It's the Metifta Pirkei Avot. Which all the Gemaras I have, I should say all of them, this particular one, I don't know if you can see it. Anyway, that's the Metifta series. So when it said in Mishnah Pirkei Avot, Havu Matuni Bedin, so I want to discuss that a little bit. Rashi says that if someone comes, right, if a judgment comes before you a second time, a third time, let's say, something that's oftenly asked, don't say, this is the din. I've already said this 2 or 3 times. I already know it. I know it, and I've already told it over. So just be matuni bedin. Be cautious. Be slow. That's Rashi. Okay, now The clarifications, the explanations down below mention a few things. That the poskim, the people who are determining law, should be b'mitinut. B'mitinut means the opposite of quick. Don't give a psak that is so quick. But right? And don't take your first opinion. Al tachri'u b'machshava rishona. Don't spurt out the first thing that comes to mind. Very, very important. Why? Sheme yidgala lechem devarim chadashim. Because perhaps new information will come up. Obviously, the only way that's going to come up is if you ask questions or if you allow the person to speak. Someone comes to you for advice. You didn't even hear the whole story, or you think you hold this story. Ask them, is there anything more you'd like to add? At least that, right? There's got to be a dialogue, a discussion. So perhaps new information will come up that you didn't think about earlier. And right there, and that was based on the Rambam's idea, but the Tosfos Yontiv explains that this is not talking about judges. It's talking about every single human being. I'll just say it. Pirush din zeh al kol echad ve'echad. Every human being. That what they end up doing is sheyitzok es inyonav memetunas kvod rosh. Rather, you should make a determination based on slow. I'm going to use the word kavod rosh, means a heaviness of the head. In other words, deep thought. It's not just don't spurt out what you think. Because what's going to happen, you very easily make mistakes. The word is shgaga. Shgaga is based on ignorance and error. But actually, it's irresponsible. It's I don't know why I forgot the English for it, but it's
impetuous.
You're held for this irresponsibility. Shogeg means it wasn't done on purpose with full consciousness. There was mistakes made, but those mistakes are pshia. That's it, negligence. There's negligence involved. You go to a rabbi who's not qualified. Now, if you know he's not qualified, you know that he's not qualified, and you ask him his advice and follow his advice, you are being negligent. I mean, is this obvious? So basically, the person giving the psak, giving the advice, or giving the halakhic ruling, she should make sure to ask new advice from Rebbitzin, not to just spurt out the first thing that comes to mind, but to understand that we should understand that we could be responsible based on negligence if we don't take proper consideration for what we're about to say. The next thing is, so in other words, why should you be slow in giving judgment? Kedei shelo ta'u b'shikul hadas. Shikul hadas means it's not the facts. It's more like the determination within your mind. You know, you're taking all the risks, versus all the benefits. So you're working it out in order to make a determination, right? So that's why you should be mitunim b'din. Take your time to work it all out. So he brings down here in terms of the Meiri says this, that how much more we don't need to say when things are clear. When things are clear, I should say like this, 1 second. Sorry, when things are not clear. Obviously, if it's not clear, you have to say this. But what happens when they are clear? You have to say it as well. In other words, we always speak about this idea of what's the point of teaching anything? It's only things that are counterintuitive we need to teach. So obviously, if the things are not clear, you have to take your time. What happens when things are clear? You have to take your time. Okay? But Ella filu kishadin barur lehem datam. Even when things are clear, you have to take your time and to make the determination slowly with clarity. Okay? That's very important.
We find that as B'nai Noach. I mean, the Noahide laws are from a Jewish, learned Jewish position, it's like they're common sense, right? But from B'nai Noach, people are like, what is that? And you have to explain it somewhat. But we see that when we're listening to the rabbis, it's crystal clear and plain, straightforward. And yet, Noahide, to people that are new to the concept, it's so foreign that the logical dots have to be put in place for people to
Uh-huh,
connect them.
uh-huh. I hear that. The last thing he mentions on this comment is also, I think, a little bit counterintuitive, but there is, I think people will understand it. It's actually, it makes a lot of sense that the nature of man is to lean his heart towards and believe the person who seems to be oppressed, as opposed to the one who's the oppressor. And you don't have the facts. You don't have all the facts. Get them before you make a decision. Like there's a court case going on right now, I think not far from the border between Canada and the United States, about a certain person who uh, was attacked and he killed somebody. And it's going on right now. Is he going to be counted as a murderer, or is he acting in self defense? Okay. So, the heart wants to lean towards the oppressed and accuse, or lean towards the guilty side for the oppressor. But who says that's always the case? You don't even know. Okay, the next idea he brings down, and it's a very interesting idea. Just to reiterate what we said before about the Asherah tree. So if you go to in Exodus chapter 20, verse 22.
Chapter 20.
Yeah, before you read it, it's going to be Exodus chapter 20, verse 22. But then we're going to, or 23, I think. 22.
22 says, "And when you make for me an altar of stones, you shall not build them of hewn stones, lest you wield your sword upon it and desecrate it."
It's
And you
actually
shall,
the it's actually verse 23. Let me just finish. 23 is the last verse of that chapter, and then you're going
yes.
to read the first verse of the next chapter. So read the two of them together.
Oh, and you shall not ascend with steps upon my altar, so that your nakedness shall not be exposed upon it. And going to the next chapter, and these are the ordinances that you shall set before them.
So this idea of not ascending steps, okay? So we don't. I don't know if we talked about on any of your
No,
shows.
I've heard Rabbi Skobach talk about this, and he said for that reason there was a ramp installed.
So you apparently, maybe when I climb up 52 steps to my apartment, I sometimes go 2 steps at a time. Okay, going up, you you take large strides and you move forward quicker than if you were on a ramp. So this idea of don't go up steps, so don't go quickly up my altar. And the next verse says these are the laws that you should place before them. This is talking about the Sanhedrin. And where are the Sanhedrin? They're sitting next to the altar. There's just another idea here, right? That the smichut. So we learn here that when the judges give their judgment, they should. It's forbidden for them to go quickly in their judgment. Clear as mud. Now, might be clear to some people.
No, thank you.
There's a comment here that I think is very interesting because I'm constantly learning, right? So I might have seen this Rashi 100 times, but it never made sense till tonight when I was preparing. It's brought down in Avos the Rabbi Nosson. He says we learn a whole nother idea in being slow to judgment. And he brings this idea that we learn that a man should be mamtin, which means slow with his words, and he shouldn't be makpid al dvar. What's the difference between mamtin and makpid? Mamtin, again, means slow, cautious, but not overly cautious. Makpid means painstakingly meticulous. Painstakingly meticulous is a problem. It usually involves some kind of anger. You are so distraught that you take your words and you make sure that every syllable is said correctly. That the comment here says in Rabbi Nosson that this will actually cause you, if you're too particular, I guess like your mind is just working overtime, figuring out the exact emphasis and all
Minutia.
that,
Yeah.
that you're actually going to forget your words. And we find by Moshe. Now, this, if you go to Numbers chapter 31, verse 21.
Verse 21 reads, Eleazar the Cohen said to the soldiers returning from battle, this is the statute that the Lord commanded Moses.
Now, let's just take our time, try to understand this. Where do you have Eleazar the Cohen telling the soldiers returning from battle? Where does it make sense for him to teach them this is the law that God commanded Moses? Why is he doing this? Rashi says, because Moses came to a state of anger. Kas, I think, is here, we're talking about being makpid, being overly cautious about your words. It will cause someone to make a mistake. These very laws of the purging of Gentile vessels, meaning when you go to war and you capture these vessels, right? These beautiful pots that you could use, but guess what? They cook pork or milk and meat in it. So for a Jew to use it, it has to be converted through a mikveh, but also has to be purged with hot water, right? These are laws. Moses taught them. Moses, wait a second. He's telling them now when they come back from the war to do this. Very nice. I'm just reading, going back to the Rashi. Since Moses came to a state of anger, he came to that those laws eluded him. In other words, he forgot his words. In that moment of anger, which we're not going to call anger per se, but we're going to say it's makpid. He was being so deliberate about his words. And we're going to go back to verse, I think it's verse 14, 14. Just to
14.
show you that Moses became angry.
Right. 14 says, Moses became angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds who had returned from the campaign of war.
Now, he was so incensed that they allowed the women to live that he was very particular, extremely particular about that one point. And becoming very angry and particular about that one point caused him to not discuss a very calm thing that he could have discussed. This is what I'm just reading the commentary. It's unbelievable that when you put it together, you understand that it's to be mamtim, to be deliberate in terms of cautious, but not overly cautious. When you come overly cautious, you make a mistake like Moses made. And basically it comes down to this, that Eliezer could not have been told. It was never said that God told Eliezer. Moses was taught, and Moses taught them, but Moses never taught the people because he forgot. So, but the right thing for Eliezer to say was, this is what Moses taught. In other words, that's the right way to do it. That's all fine. The comment ends here by saying that if this is true by Moshe, then it's a logical conclusion for us that just as Moses is very wise and great, and he's the head of all the prophets, in other words, all prophecy basically comes through Moses, at a time where he's being overly cautious, right? The idea of being too stern with his words caused him to forget. And we're talking about Moses, and he was overly cautious, caused him to forget. So how much more so we have to learn that a person should not, all they should do is be cautious, but not overly cautious. And that was a very interesting thing I never saw before. I didn't know, and I'm very happy that I got a chance to see that.
Yeah, we got to stay real, right? If we overdo it,
Yeah.
Embellishment.
This idea we said before about not being a lawyer, right? You're a judge, don't be a lawyer. In other words, you have to be objective. Look for the truth, right? Rather than defending a biased position at all costs, get the relevant information and make a decision based on what makes the most sense, not what you desire. The last paragraph, I actually, two more paragraphs. What do I believe? These are decisions that you have to make. I mean, to say I'm not sure, that's fine. That means you're going to research and try to figure out. But, is there a God? Is there not a God? Do I believe in the mitzvahs? Do I believe in, pursuing a certain act? So these are real serious philosophical questions, and don't treat them cavalierly, but rather, like, is there such a thing as resurrection of the dead? Is there really such a thing as the afterlife? These are all very important things that are going to have a major impact on your life, right? Especially us Jews, we believe that actions, everything's going to have consequence. So if you believe a certain thing, it's not just the belief, but it's it's the follow through
The
based on that
baggage.
belief.
Yeah.
Right. So these might be nagging questions, but you if you lack any clarity, go and pursue. Make sure to come with some clarity, because this is
It
this is about.
sounds to me like ironing. If you've ever ironed out wrinkles, they sometimes it takes a methodical and a bit of steam to really make them go away. But it produces that crisp result for sure.
My wife loves to watch me iron. Now, it could be because she's not ironing herself, but it's probably not just the ironing. There's other things I do. And when I'm washing the dishes as well, she's watching me like, it's like, she says, it must be very therapeutic. You're totally engrossed. You're totally involved. Like, it's like your whole being is in it. And it's very therapeutic for me. I need to, switch off my mind for a little bit, do something. But yeah. When you're doing something with your full heart, you know that you're doing it right. And I
It's
love making sure
polished.
all
Yeah.
those creases are out of the shirt. Yeah. Um, okay. In Gemara Brachos 4a, it's a very important lesson. Do I have it here? Yeah. It says over there, teach your mouth to say, I don't know. Now, where do we learn that from? That's the statement. So in Gemara 4a, Brachos 4a, Moses knew, or did he not know, when midnight was? When he approaches Pharaoh's astrologers, he mentions that the 10th plague is going to happen around midnight, kechatzot, around midnight. So the whole Gemara over there actually is discussing King David. When did he know? Did he know when midnight was? But let's talk about Moshe. Moshe says around midnight. So the question was, really, Moses didn't know when midnight was? Did he have to say around midnight? So what did Moses maintain? He was worried that if the astrologers of Pharaoh erred, which is very likely because they're not experts at anything except deception, that they would say, no, midnight was a few minutes before, a few minutes after, and therefore the plague of the firstborn didn't happen at midnight. So they would dismiss whatever lesson needed to be learned, which was a big lesson. Or they would consider and say Moses was a liar, right? Oh, he lied because he said midnight, but it happened 2 minutes before, 2 minutes after. So here, that's the statement right here. So Moses spoke in accordance with the principle articulated by the master. Accustom your tongue to say, I do not know, lest you become entangled in a web of deceit.
So important.
Yeah. There was some other interesting things, and I forgot to pull it up. I only have the sources I only have like the quote, but I don't have the actual quote itself. I just have where it was, and I forget what it was referring to. Let me just see if I can remember. Day 249, and I have to look it up. Oh, you know what? I actually do have it. I have it somewhere. Okay. Let's see if I can remember this idea. Okay. Give me a second. I know it's related to this idea of saying you don't know. I'm pretty sure. Just have to get the right page first. 1 second. No, I don't know why I'm on the wrong page. Let's just see.
Lots of notes.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem. Okay, this is about a scholar who rejoices in the opportunity to render halakhic decisions. This is not good. So we discussed this earlier in humility, anava. It's based on arrogant of heart, and the person feels this joy. He's considered a fool, a wicked person, and arrogant of spirit. Okay. Let me just find that. We do know, right? It says in Micha, chapter 6, verse 8, to walk humbly with your God, right? Walk humbly with your God. So again, you're in a position where people are coming to you for advice or to make halachic decisions. Downplay. I mean, not to downplay the seriousness, but downplay and slow down and not try to display some kind of arrogance and all that stuff. And I'm sure that's what it's talking about. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Micah says, it says, yeah, he has told you, oh man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, but to do justice, to love loving kindness, and to walk discreetly with your God.
It's interesting. The Your Day that I was going to quote, I didn't have to quote in front of me, was actually something we quoted either last week or the week before, talking about glorifying yourself by putting your name on a building, right? You should not want to put your name on the building, but if you're talked into it, it's okay, right? So in the Ramah, the Ramosha Isserlis mentions in the laws of tzedakah that if a person who glorifies himself with charity, he loses the reward for the mitzvah. In fact, he'll even be punished for his arrogance. So you see this also is taking place over there. Now, in the Mishnah Brura, in the very beginning, the very first halacha of how to behave when you wake up in the morning, regarding a person who finds himself in a situation where others less learned than him will learn from his ways. In other words, you're sitting around with a bunch of other people, and they know more than you. Zip your mouth. What are you trying to prove, right? You're better off keeping your mouth closed. But what if you're around people who don't know as much as you? So then you should make a point by doing. Okay, it actually mentions about doing mitzvahs publicly. So you're around these great rabbis or great Talmud, scholars, and they're doing mitzvahs in public. So you should be a little bit reserved and not try to
Don't show them
be
up.
in the
No
forefront.
one-upmanship.
Exactly. But when you are let's say the most learned, even though you're not so learned yourself, then don't hold back. Try to do things publicly so others can learn from you. And you should all do this for the sake of heaven, not to gain. I don't know where that continues. 1 second. Not to gain honor for yourself. There you go. So it mentions in the Bir Halacha adds that in a situation where there are evildoers influencing the public against God and His Torah, and they ignore any peaceful approach to change their ways, so then it becomes a holy obligation to fight against them publicly and to demonstrate open allegiance to God. Basically, the idea was based on that if you're around evildoers and they happen to be very successful at what they're doing, don't start up with them. You're not going to win, especially if it's personal. Stay away from it. But once it becomes for the sake of God, so then there's a time and a place where it may be appropriate to step up and make your voice heard. So with that being said, we pretty much finished for today. As I mentioned in the very beginning, this is just an outline for people to do their own homework.
Study, yeah.
Work, yeah. I know I mentioned this is the book, the Pirkei Avot. There was one comment here that I thought of sharing. Now I have to find it. Okay, be deliberate in judgment. So this admonition is addressed to judges. Even if a similar case came before the judges 2 or 3 times in the past, he should not be hasty to equate the cases. Rather, he should deliberate before issuing a ruling. The Rambam in Hilchos Sanhedrin codifies the law as follows. One who acts irreverently, I mean, I guess quickly and not seriously, in deciding the law and is quick to hand down a ruling before thoroughly investigating the issue until it is clear as day, is considered a fool, a wicked person, and an arrogant one. This is what the sages commanded: be deliberate in judgment.
And that's that cookie cutter precedence, right? Where everybody some try to make the error without looking at the whole of the situation or circumstance. Cookie cutter precedence.
Yeah. Just to mention, to end with, he quotes Rabbi Avos, the Rebbe Nosson. He extends this maxim to all people. For each of us is a judge who must evaluate people and situations. We're doing it all the time. In all matters, one should act deliberately rather than in haste.
Yes, and thank you for clarifying
so,
that.
Like I said, there's so much we can go on forever. We can go on forever.
Oh, beautiful stuff.
All good things must come to an end. Well, this is just the beginning for most of us. So, B'ezrat Hashem, we go from chayil to chayil, from strength to strength.
Well, thank you so much, Rabbi, because, you just by touching on the sheer fact, because those of us that come out of Christianity, especially, I mean, nobody likes the idea of judging another, but the reality is we have to judge daily, endlessly. You can't get away from it. You're up, you're walking, if you're interacting or breathing, you're weighing forever in front of your eyes scenarios and circumstances, stepping into things and stepping back from others. I appreciate you today talking about those that are indecisive have in fact made a decision, because people need to realize sometimes indecision is the wrong decision. And so many people in our day and age, they try to avoid confrontation to the point where they actually allow wickedness to prosper. And you can it's easier to cut a plant down when it's small rather than let it grow large. And so,
there are consequences to indecision, for sure.
Oh, for sure. Well, Rabbi, thank you so much. So we have our daylight savings tomorrow in the West. So I know it's been the same today, same time as normal for us here in the West, but you were a little hour earlier. But we'd have to, if we're going to do next week, we'd have to go back to the later hour, 11:30 p.m. in Israel. Hashem willing, are you okay for number 39 next week, or shall we leave it in the air?
No, we're okay for 39 at the regular time, the original time, right?
Right. Yeah, because we do our daylight savings. We go back an hour tonight. So there you have it, folks. So Hashem willing, we are aiming to be on the same time next week with part 39. I'm so enjoying this, and I find as it goes from this point on to the very 48th way, it's just immense topics that we need to acquire, and you'll see it unfurl as Rabbi Poston begins to share it. And I think you'll learn to appreciate each and every one, especially going down the stretch here. And it should inspire you to want to actually acquire every one all the way back to the very beginning. It's a beautiful, beautiful teaching, and we're thankful that Rabbi Noah Weinberg had written that work, and it's just profound and useful for each and every person to integrate in their life. So we're going to sign off for now. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, everybody. Till next week. Bye for now.
It's